Now we have a returning author back in the book club for this edition of the podcast.
It's been nearly 10 years since we inducted this writer and recommended that you crack open the cover of his then current book, Restless.
He's a brilliant writer. Since then, of course, he's built up even more of a catalogue and a huge collection of literary plaudits and awards.
We are just delighted to have William Boyd back in the Richard and Judy Book Club, exclusive to WHSmith.
Hello, I'm William Boyd. I'm the author of Sweet Caress. I write films and I write drama for television. I also write plays now, and I write a lot of journalism. So I've got many irons in the fire, and I think each one requires a different mindset. They're quite different forms of writing from writing a novel. The novel is a world of absolute liberation, but these other worlds are worlds of parameters and compromises. So you kind of change mental gear in your head and you set down to write your article or your play or your television miniseries, and with those mental gears engaged, you do them. But it's a different form of writing entirely, and it's shaped by the industrial processes of that medium, whether it's film or television or theatre, and you make those adjustments accordingly. I'm fundamentally a novelist, first and foremost. That's how I describe myself, and that's the day job, if you like. And I moonlight in these other worlds of film, television, and theatre, and I do love them. I love collaborating, and of course, novel writing isn't collaborating. You're the sort of original one-man band. And so I think I take myself off to these other genres, these other mediums, in order to have colleagues and work with other people, go to meetings. And so the collective endeavour is something I really enjoy, but there's no doubt that I see myself principally as a novelist. I have a fairly straightforward writing routine. I'm not an early riser, so I tend to write in the afternoons, which is a bit odd because most writers, I think, write in the mornings, but I tend to write from after lunch until the cocktail hour, and I write every day, and I can write for about 3 hours before my brain packs up, but you just steadily keep at it, and somehow the book gets written. When you finish a novel, it's a funny moment because you're actually sort of overwhelmed with fatigue. Everything is very stale, and you have to rely on your memories of the beginnings of the novel, when you were first starting and when it was underway, chapter 1, 2 and 3, when you were brimming with enthusiasm and confidence and very happy with what you're writing, because by the end of the process, and for me it's a 3-year process, it takes me 2 years to figure it out and research it and about a year to write it. And when I finish, I'm knackered, and you've lost all critical distance on it as well. You don't know if it's good, bad, or indifferent. So I tend to think back to the moments I began, and if I felt good then by and large, the novel will be good as far as I'm concerned. But it's really it's exhausting, and I think one of the things you need as a novelist is stamina, because it takes so long. The advice I'd give to a young writer is quite simple in a way. I mean, everybody has the capacity to tell a story, I believe. But what I always say to young writers is, when they say, I've got an idea for a novel or a film or whatever, and I say, how does it end? And they say, well, I haven't figured that out yet. And I said, well, don't start. My advice is always think of your ending, have a destination, and then there's a good chance you'll arrive at that destination. So many writers start writing and then fizzle out or run out of steam or don't know how the story is going to continue. As soon as you've got the ending in mind, then you're on surer ground. And then I think you need a lot of stamina, because it does take a long time.
Well, as I said to William Boyd, I personally think that this is his best book yet. I really do, and he's obviously written some extraordinary novels over the last, 30, 35 years. It's a wonderful concept. He basically takes us through the big events of the 20th century, through the lens of a camera as wielded by a woman. A young girl who, when she's 7 years old, gets given a box brownie, basically, and goes on to become one of the most famous war photographers of her generation. But it's not just an excuse to describe the way that the 20th century developed, and as I say, the key events, the outcrops that we all look back on and can see, whether it's the Vietnam War or the rise of Nazi Germany or Oswald Moses' black shirts. It's much more than that. It's a human story, as he himself says. It's a cradle to the grave description of a human being's passage through life. And yet he sets it against this dramatic backdrop. I think it's wonderful.
It is extraordinarily good, and I think that one of the most entertaining things about it is that it's full of photographs. What did you say? There are about 73 photographs in this book, which are purported to have been taken by the heroine of the story, Amory. Her photos are photos she's taken. In fact, William found them in junk shops and flea markets all over the place, and publishes them, astonishingly. You don't know who any of them are. It would be wonderful to see if any of them come back.
I have to say that they are authentic because they are real photographs. They're not cobbled together, as you say. They're taken from old catalogues and flea markets and whatnot. But even knowing that, when I was reading the book and then I'd turn a page and there'd be another picture, a part of me would think, oh yeah, she's taken that one now. You know, she has taken it. The character's taken it.
That's the mark of a brilliant author.
He brings his characters utterly to life.
What drew me down there, I wonder, to the edge of the garden? I remember the summer light, the trees, the bushes, the grass luminously green, basted by the bland, benevolent late afternoon sun. Was it the light? But there was the laughter also, coming from where a group of people had gathered by the pond. Someone must have been horsing around, making everyone laugh. The light and the laughter, then. I was in the house, in my bedroom, bored, with the window open wide, so I could hear the chatter of conversation from the guests. And then the sudden arpeggio of delighted laughter came that made me slip off my bed and go to the window to see the gentlemen and ladies and the marquee and the trestle tables laid out with canapes and punch bowls. I was curious. Why were they all making their way towards the pond? What was the source of this merriment? So I hurried downstairs to join them. And then, halfway across the lawn, I turned and ran back to the house to fetch my camera. Why did I do that? I think I have an idea now, all these years later. I wanted to capture that moment, that benign congregation in the garden on a warm summer evening in England, to capture it and imprison it forever. Somehow I sensed I could stop time's relentless motion and hold that scene, that split second, with the ladies and the gentlemen in their finery, as they laughed, careless and untroubled. I would catch them fast, eternally, thanks to the properties of my wonderful machine. In my hands I had the power to stop time, or so I fancied.
Let Richard and Judy take away the risk of judging a book by its cover. Listen to their recommendations on the Richard and Judy Book Club podcast.
This is another of our well-chosen summer reads. I say well-chosen because I happen to think that this particular book, I dare to say this, is the best thing that this writer's done. But there we are, that's just my subjective opinion. It's by William Boyd, and it's called Sweet Caress. The smallest, seemingly trivial events can change a life. Early in the 20th century, 7-year-old Amory Clay, girl, is given a box camera by her uncle. It marks the beginning of her destiny as a war photographer in a life packed with adventure and lovers and husbands and children. But as well as Amory's story, William Boyd gives us a series of searing close-ups on some of the most defining moments of the last century. It is an absolutely enthralling read, and he's here now. Was it the idea of a journey through the 20th century and its rocky outcrops that came to you first, or was it the idea of a girl with a camera?
Well, actually, it was a bit of both. The basic idea I had was to write a whole life, but a whole woman's life, because I've written 2 whole lives of blokes, of 2 men, and I thought I should write a whole life of a woman, because it's actually quite unusual, because novels are usually bits of a life, you know, a week or 10 years, or even
an episode.
Even Nicholas Nickleby is not the whole life of Nicholas Nickleby, but I've done these 3 novels now, which are cradle to grave stories of people's lives, and I thought I really ought to do a woman's life. And so then the next question was, what does she do? And then I thought photography, because I'm sort of become a bit obsessed by photography. And so I thought I'll make her a woman photographer, and that would allow me to take her to these various bits of the 20th century that intrigue me.
So you always wanted the character, this woman character, you always wanted her to be our companion to these events.
Yes, I mean, I think that in a way it's an excuse for me to visit places and people that I'm fascinated by, and then see them through the eyes of this fictional character. And I enjoy doing it, actually. It's very self-indulgent, and I don't choose them because they have any kind of global significance. I choose them purely because I'm intrigued to go there with her, you know.
It's a massive undertaking to intend to write about somebody's whole life, cradle to grave. I mean, do you ever get sort of a bit frightened when you start, or shortly after you've started or something, by the immensity of it?
Yes, I do actually. Every time I'm about to start a novel, I say to myself, how the hell do I do this? You know, and I console myself by looking back at the others. So you've done it before. You can pull it off again. But it is a sort of jumping off a cliff moment.
Yeah.
And of course, the minute you start, it all comes back to you. But there is that moment of a sort of vague doubt that, can I do this again?
Oh, you know what, William, as a very new writer, I'm sure I speak for Judy as well, that's such a comfort to hear from you. That you have these moments of the dark soul before you start.
Yes, I think any author who doesn't admit to that is being a bit self-deluding.
What I really enjoyed about the book was the way she doesn't just observe history and these immense events unfolding, she's part of them. I mean, you fully integrate her. She's not just there as an observer, sort of separated from the events by the lens of the camera. She's in there. For example, she's pregnant and she loses a baby because she's kicked in the belly by one of Mosley's fascists, demonstrators. Again, clearly very intentional to make sure that she gets her fingers into these events.
Yes, and again, we forget there was a fascist movement in Britain, and the black shirts in the 1930s were alongside Mussolini and Hitler and Franco in Spain. We sort of airbrushed that out of our personal history, but it was a very serious moment, and the marches by the black shirts in the East End of London were quite extraordinary. So again, because I'm fascinated by it, I thought, well, I'll put Amory right down in the middle of that. And of course, she receives a terrible beating at the hands of these thugs, and it changes her life.
Yeah, and the photographs, which are sort of, it's just, I mean, I can't, this isn't television, so I can't hold it up and show you, but the book is full of photographs, allegedly those taken by Amory. Where did you find them?
Well, there are actually 73 photographs in this novel, which I think is a first. I mean, people have used photographs in novels, and Virginia Woolf used them, but I mean, I don't think anybody's put 73 in a novel before. And I found them in junk shops and antique fairs in France.
Speculating earlier.
Online, of course. And they're all anonymous. I've no idea who took them or who the people are, but they belong to me now, because I paid, 50p or £1 for them. And I've given the people in them an identity and a context, and suddenly these anonymous photographs cease to be anonymous, and they have a life of their own.
How extraordinary. Has anybody recognised any of the people in your photographs yet?
Not yet,
but
I would be very intrigued, particularly in the later phase of Amory's life when she goes to the Vietnam War. Conceivably, the photographs of these young soldiers, these must be guys in their 70s now, or somebody might recognise an uncle or a father. But
absolutely,
I'd be very happy to know that.
But you have form for this, because in the book you wrote about the artist, the painter, didn't you end up actually selling a painting that you, allegedly by him, this fictional character, that you knocked off in half a day? And it went for about £7,000 at Sotheby's.
Well, more than half a day.
Sorry,
I'm joking. No, I did. I created this artist called Nat Tate, and I published a little book. Actually, it was published by David Bowie, who was my publisher, extraordinarily enough. On April Fool's Day 1998, and this hoax has gone on and on and on, and I thought I must bring about closure, so I'll sell a fake Nat Tate drawing at Sotheby's at auction money went to charity, didn't go to me, and we sold it for £7,500. And guess what? It was bought by Ant of Ant and Dec.
Never.
No.
Yes,
Never.
yes.
I know Ant really well.
That's a novelist detail.
No,
I love
exactly,
that. I love
exactly.
that.
No, it's extraordinary. And of course, Ant is an anagram of Nat, so it couldn't have been more perfect.
Too perfect.
And what? I haven't seen the photo, the portrait. Well, the picture. What is it of?
Well, Nat Tate, this strange American artist I invented, was obsessed with bridges, and he did a series of drawings of bridges, hundreds of drawings of bridges for his own perverse reasons. And this is a very kind of stylized drawing of a bridge covered in thumbprints as well. So it's semi-abstract, you know,
Love it.
a bit nonsensical, but it has a context.
Do you paint as well? I mean, do you paint as a hobby or?
Well, I wanted to be a painter first before I became a writer, and I wanted to go to art school, but my father said, forget it, you're not going to art school. So not being a rebel, I turned to literature.
Yeah.
But I've always kept an interest in it, and I draw and doodle a bit, and I write a lot about art. That's what I do, because I think if I started painting, I'd stop writing, and that would be a bad thing.
You talked about doubts that assail you just as you're about to start a new project, but going all the way back to the first book, which I remember buying, A Good Man in Africa, which was so funny, and still is such a funny book. When you completed that, and you must have known that it was good, you know, when it was done, and you'd written the end on draft 3 or whichever one it was, did you absolutely know then that you'd found your vocation, you know, your destiny, that this was what you could do, not just you wanted to do, but you could do it?
Yes, I think so, but actually it was my third novel. This is quite interesting.
I'm
'cause
sorry.
No, but third, it was my first published novel, but I'd
right.
written 2 unpublished novels before that, which was kind of my apprenticeship, which I put in a bottom drawer because I knew they weren't right. But I felt with Good Man in Africa that it was fully formed, and it was very quickly snapped up by a publisher. But it's quite interesting that it's a tricky business writing a novel, and you can't just sort of jump into it unprepared. So those 2 unpublished novels I wrote allowed me to write A Good Man in Africa with confidence. But I sort of knew it was good, but I didn't know I could earn my living as a writer. I got a very measly advance. But so it was only my third novel. With my third novel, I thought I can do this full time.
And when I said in my opening remarks here that for my money, I think, and maybe it's just the shock of the new and all of that, but I think it's probably the best thing you've ever written. Is that slightly insulting to someone with a back catalogue like yours?
Not to me, actually, Richard, because I have a very boring answer to that question. People say, what's your favourite novel? And I always say it's my last one.
Yeah.
Because I think it's, well, I mean, some people would think A Good Man in Africa is my best novel, and I've been going downhill ever since. But for me, it's me firing on all cylinders. Technically, I think it's me at my most competent. So it's a kind of writerly judgment.
Right.
And in a way, it's up to readers to say, I like this one better than that one. But for me, I always think the novel I've written last is the best I can do, but the one I'm going to write next is going to be slightly better.
Well, I thought this was near perfect, if not perfect. I really just in every page, from the very beginning and the attempted drowning of the daughter by the mad father, right from the start, it just completely sucked me in. I thought it was wonderful. We were saying before we started recording that you're not one of those writers who shares the unfolding pages as they're written with anyone. You wait till it's all done and then you show it to your wife, and she's the first person to see it. So, is it possible to ask what you're writing now? What the next one is?
Yes, I'm writing it. It's brewing up, and I take 2 years to figure the whole book out, and I don't start until I know how it's going to end. So I haven't quite reached the ending yet, but I'm writing a novel that's set in the very late 19th century in Russia and in Paris, in St. Petersburg and Paris, and it's about a musician. But I'm not going to say anything more than that. So I'm venturing into another art form.
Yeah, I can see you selling a few records off the back of that.
Well, fictional musician, of course.
Maybe you'll learn to play the squeeze box.
Yes, exactly.
Well, listen, it's great to meet you. And as I say, the book is called Sweet Caress by William Boyd here. Available in all good bookshops, as they say, but if you get it in WHSmith, who are our partners in the Richard and Judy Book Club, you do get a lot of extra content in the back that you won't get anywhere else. You get a good Q&A with the author, lots of background information, all sorts of extra goodies, really. And that's if you get it from WHSmith. So I can say this with complete confidence, not as an instruction, but just enjoy.
Richard and Judy, exclusive to WHSmith. The gift that just keeps on giving.
Well, look, thanks for all your feedback on the book club. We hope you're enjoying meeting another group of amazing authors.
I'm always trying to stay a couple of steps ahead of my own self-doubt. So I come up with a routine that works and I will use it until something changes and suddenly it doesn't work anymore. So I'm often to be found in cafes near where I live. I like there to be noise on the air. I like there to be other people around.
The writing routine has not varied much in many years. It's very strict and it's very disciplined. I start each morning at 7 o'clock with a strong cup of coffee in the same spot, the same office, the same chair, the same quilt, the same computer. Although I changed computers about 10 years ago. And I write very hard from about 7 a.m. until about 10 a.m., take a break, and then go back for a couple of hours. So it's normally 4 or 5 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week.
I don't like to be distracted. So I have admitted to people in the past I've written in a cupboard so I can actually get away from any distractions. I know I sound really strange, but I just read Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, and I was like, I need to have my own space to write. And my husband and I live in a one-bedroom flat in Glasgow, so the only space at the time was in our big hall cupboard.
I have, I think, an absolutely fantastic routine for writing, which means I get all my words written within an hour and a half to 3 hours every day. The secret is to completely disconnect yourself from the internet. So instead of writing at home, which I used to do, where I would sit in front of my computer for 8 hours and then tear all my hair out at the end of the day because I hadn't written anything and I'd spent all day buying things on eBay, I now take my computer out of the house and go and sit in a cafe. I do not ask for the Wi-Fi password. And within an hour and a half to 3 hours, I've written my 1,000 words.
My favourite place to write is the local library. And particularly if I know what I want to write, if I know I need to get a certain number of words down that day, I like to go to my local library and use the study room, where it's nice and quiet. And I find I can, if I'm writing at home, I might get 1,500 words done if I'm lucky. If I'm writing in the library, I can do 3,000 to 4,000 in a day. And simply psychologically getting up in the morning, leaving the house and going to work, I think helps a lot.
My writing routine is fairly boring, actually. I used to be a freelance journalist, so I'm quite used to just getting up in the morning, sitting at my desk and writing a fairly normal working day.
So what's next in our series exclusive to WHSmith?
For me, the real seed of the story can be a question like, what if? For example, with the girls, it was, what if my children who live on a communal garden went on a sleep out in a tent in the garden in the middle of the night and something bad happened? Would I still trust my neighbours?
A woman who knows how to top the bestsellers lists is with us. Come and meet Lisa Jewell.
The Richard and Judy Book Club, exclusive to WHSmith. Richard and Judy, recommending great reads for you.